As I've been preparing for the retreat, I've just been reflecting on my connection with Chenrezig in this lifetime. And maybe you've been doing the same thing. In 1989, I was a Vipassana practitioner, and His Holiness came to Seattle, and he did 3 events. He did a public talk, he had an interfaith dialogue at St. Mark's Cathedral, and then he gave the 4-arm Chenrezig empowerment. And I didn't have a clue about any of those things, but I just knew I had to attend all 3 of them. And so I was sitting in the back of the empowerment with some friends, not knowing what was going on, but as soon as he introduced the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, I just found my mouth moving, and it just felt so natural. Perhaps familiarity from a previous life, who knows? I hope so. When I first met Venerable Chodron in 1995, she was living in a little 2-bedroom house in Seattle near Green Lake, and she was teaching out of her living room. And so we would get together on Wednesday nights. That was the night that just happened to work for me to go. She taught on Mondays and Wednesdays. And on Wednesday nights, we would do the 35 Buddha practice, purification, and then we would do the Chenrezig Sadhana, and then we studied Door to Satisfaction by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And starting with a sadhana as a very new student is not the usual way we get introduced to Buddhism. But that was the night I was free, and that's what she was offering. So again, I found that I really enjoyed that practice. And I'm not sure if it was connected, but probably. Some of my friends started saying, you're not as angry. What are you doing? Something was going on there. In the following years, as I continued studying with Venerable, she introduced us to the Nune practice, which is a very intensive Chenrezig practice. And we would get together on a Friday night, and she'd give an overview, and then we'd stay at Ruth Schaefer's house on Magnolia, very close to the center. And then on Saturdays and Sundays, we'd go to the center and squeeze into the little center and do our prostrations and do the Chenrezig practice. And then on Monday morning, we'd finish with the final session, and then we'd all go off to work. Very blissful. And so we would do this once or twice a year. And it was a wonderful introduction to that practice. So again, Chenrezig practice. And I don't know if it's my Catholic background or what, but I felt very drawn to that purification practice. It was somewhere around this time that I began seeing His Holiness, or thinking of His Holiness, as an emanation of the Compassion Buddha. I'm not sure what contributed to that, but the more I learned about him, the more I listened to his teachings, that came to light. And then when I was living in India in 2000 and 2001, this is where I first participated in 8 Nunes in a row. And I was pretty new to Buddhism still, and that was a very intensive experience. I was pretty unprepared for it. But I remember during that retreat, embracing the difficulties and really taking refuge deeply. I was there to explore monastic life, and so I really embraced refuge at that time. And I just remember again how this group, this small group of us that had done those 8 Nunes, felt very refreshed and rejuvenated from that practice, even though it was difficult, and we all lost a lot of weight. In 2001, Lama Zopa Rinpoche inaugurated the 100 million Mani retreat at Chenrezig Institute in Australia. He wanted to institute this around the world. It's very popular in Himalayan countries, but wasn't so popular in the West at that time. And although they gave it their best, the monastics and the lay folks at Chenrezig Institute could only collect about 25 million mantras in the 3 months, and this was over the summer months, because that was the best time of year when not anything else was happening in the meditation hall that they could do it. So I think it was quite a grueling experience for many of them as they're doing prostrations, and he wanted them to do hundreds and thousands of water bowl offerings every day. And so when I arrived in 2002, the nuns were a little bit traumatized by their experience. I think it had been arduous, and so, but they wanted to continue with this 100 million Mani retreat. And I was very green at the time. I was very naive. And so they asked me, would you like to lead it? And I said, sure, I'm happy to do it. So it was shorter that year. It was 6 weeks instead of 3 months. But I remember sitting in the Gompa and just, again, feeling so blissful, reciting, well, for the most part. I mean, the knees hurt, the back aches, those sorts of things. But being very blissful in making that connection with Chenrezig. Since arriving here at the Abbey, we've had a few week-long Chenrezig retreats, and we've also done 1 or 2 nunes a year. And luckily, just in the last 4 years, since 2020, His Holiness has given the Thousand Arm Empowerment 5 different times. So we're very blessed that most of us here have had that exposure to making that connection with the Buddha of compassion, literally and figuratively. So I began wondering, well, why is deity practice like Thousand Arm Chenrezig important to do? Have you asked yourself that? Have you been exploring that as we're preparing? I think there are many answers to this question. It could just be timing, it's just arriving at the right timing. But some of the things that came to my mind is that we want to develop compassion and bodhicitta. And, this is the heart of the Mahayana tradition. So as Mahayanas, we want to actively cultivate compassion and bodhicitta. There's a wonderful quote by Lama Zopa Rinpoche that I've hung on to all these years. He says, "A loving, compassionate person heals others simply by existing. Wherever they are, compassionate people are healing because they do everything they can to help others with their body, speech, and mind. Merely being near a compassionate person heals us because it brings us peace and happiness." I remember one experience when I was staying at Root Institute. It was Tushita in Dharamsala. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche was just arriving for a short visit. And when he got out of the car, it was like this ocean or this river of some kind of energy just preceded him. I don't know what it was. I could never explain it, but it got my attention. Here's a person with compassion. He's written a beautiful little book, or they've put together a book from his teachings at that Mani retreat in Australia called Teachings from the Mani Retreat. He says, even if you know the teachings on how to meditate on bodhicitta, you still need to receive the special blessings of the deity, the Compassion Buddha. You receive these by doing the meditation and recitation we practice in the Mani retreat. Therefore, reciting Om Mani Padme Hum is one way to actualize bodhicitta, to transform your mind into bodhicitta and make your meditation on bodhicitta effective. And in her book, Cultivating a Compassionate Heart, Venerable Chodron builds on that by saying that if we just meditate on Chenrezig, but we don't meditate on Lam Rim topics, our compassion may increase by the power of recitations, but it won't be firm or grounded. And if we just meditate on Lam Rim without doing Chenrezig practice, our mind may feel dry. It needs to be softened by purifying and by creating merit, and the Chenrezig practice helps us in this way. Chenrezig practice helps us to develop both compassion and wisdom. So that's one reason that we can really rejoice that we have the opportunity to engage in this retreat. We also want to purify our own negative karma and accumulate merit. And in his book, Teachings from the Mani Retreat, Rinpoche gives a lot of fantastic quotes. I don't know if it might be called Buddhist propaganda, but it does get your attention when he talks about the incredible benefits of doing Mani recitation. He quotes several sutras, like this discourse called Exalted 11-Faced One, where Chenrezig is quoted as saying, "Bhagavan, my heart mantra has such great miracle power that by reciting it just once, the 4 root downfalls of self-liberation, self-liberation, pratimoksha, are purified." That's a pretty big claim. There'd probably be a lot of caveats of how, he goes on to say, he qualifies this. He says, if you recite this Compassion Buddha mantra once, precisely as explained in the text, so there's the caveat. We have to go back to the text and figure out what has to be included in that recitation. It can purify the 4 defeats of the pratimoksha vows and the 5 uninterrupted negative karmas. That's saying a lot, isn't it? So you can see how that lands with you. For some people, that's very inspiring, very stimulating. For others, it might bring up doubts. But there are a lot of these kind of quotes in that little booklet. Another reason that we want to engage in this practice is to benefit others. And this retreat blesses the country where it's held and brings so much peace and happiness and prosperity to the land. It creates a very peaceful vibration. So this is something that we can test for ourselves, especially with 20-something of us doing retreat together. We can test this for ourselves. He says we can think extensively of all the problems sentient beings experience, like wars, killing, famine, disease, prejudice, injustice, and then recite the mantra for those beings experiencing such problems. We can also dedicate our merit for those beings who are experiencing such problems. Another way we benefit others through reciting the mantra every day is in this way. In 2020, when His Holiness gave the empowerment in Ladakh, or I think it was 2022, he surprised us by giving us a commitment of 10 malas a day. Do you remember that? Some of us were like, oh, okay. But it's a small thing to ask. But again, in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, he says, due to the power of visualizing our body in the form of the holy body of Chenrezig and reciting his mantra, 10 malas of his mantra every day, our body is blessed. It is said that this affects our consciousness up to 7 generations. Another result is that even if we die with a non-virtuous thought, we won't be reborn in a lower realm. And it's said that even if we die, it is said that up to 7 generations of our descendants won't be reborn in the lower realms. So again, we might have to take these with a little grain of salt, but it's, it goes on to say that whoever recites 10 malas a day, whenever you walk down the road and the wind touches your body, if you happen to touch another sentient being, a human being or an insect or an animal, their negative karma gets purified. When we go swimming in a river, an ocean, maybe even taking a shower, the water that touches our body after we recited those mantras gets blessed and helps to purify all the different sentient beings that it touches after it touches us. So again, such statements are challenging maybe for our own valid perception, but I think it's important that we notice, we spend part of this retreat noticing what the effect is on our own mind and body, how it impacts us and the people around us. Another reason for doing deity practice is that our goal as Mahayanas is to attain Buddhahood. That means the 2 Buddha bodies, the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya. So in Sutrayana practice, we can't create the causes for these 2 simultaneously. You have to alternate. But the mind meditating on emptiness, as we're doing in this practice, creates causes for the Dharmakaya, and the mind appearing in the form of thousand-armed Chenrezig is the cause for the Rupakaya. So that can be very inspiring for the mind. And then one last reason is that we're cultivating a relationship, an actual relationship with the Compassion Buddha. I have this book on my table called Bodhicitta by Geshe Losang Gyatso. Geshe Dodel used to refer to him. He was I think he was the abbot at IBD when he was there. And he says, if a particular sentient being is surrounded by 1,000 Buddhas, if his own abilities are undeveloped, what can possibly be done for him? Even the Buddhas have difficulty training someone who has not built up any connection to them by way of dharma, material offerings, and prayers. But when this connection is formed, it will be the Buddha with whom the strongest ties have been forged who will actually cultivate that individual. So I'll just close with one other experience I had that has stayed with me regarding Chenrezig. In December of 2020, when my mom was near to death due to COVID pneumonia, as I was sitting by her bedside, I had just been doing a Nune retreat on my own when I got the call that she was very ill. So I was able to spend some time with her. And as I sat there the day she died, I engaged in the Chenrezig practice. And I have never felt Chenrezig so close and so powerful as I did that day. It surprised me. It really shocked me. He was there, I have no doubt. So this comes from cultivating our connection with him, day by day, session by session, mala by mala, mantra by mantra. And so let's count our blessings that we have this next month to really spend cultivating our own compassion and our relationship with the Compassion Buddha.